thank you. This is the third Climate Matters TV show that we'll be doing today. I'm your host, Stuart Scott, and we're coming to you from COP22, the Conference of Parties in Marrakesh, Morocco. I'd like to give my email address at the beginning and the end of these shows so people can be in touch if they'd like with questions that I can relay to our guests. Now, for today's topic, rather ominous topic, is it game over for the climate? This is a serious question. Now, today's guests, we have with us Dr. Peter Wadhams, who's an emeritus professor of ocean physics from Cambridge University, and his wife, Pia Casarini Wadhams, the director of the Italian Institute of Polar Geography and editor of Il Polo, the quarterly journal of that institution. So again, is it game over for the climate? Now I'll just present a couple of slides and we'll let our guests talk. That concept, I think, first hit print, that I saw at least, in this article where it was said that if Canada exploited its vast tar sand reserves, that would mean game over for the climate. This was an article written by Dr. James Hansen, who is the most famous and earliest scientist to go public with his concerns. It's a 2012 article, and a year later he resigned as head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Earth and Space Sciences, famously saying that he couldn't both work for the government and sue the government at the same time. And he walks the walk, not just talks the talk. He has been arrested probably a dozen times at civil disobedience events to protest the government's slow response to climate change. A recent article from The Independent, a British journal, again, could be game over, scientists warn. The article went on, but if leading scientists writing in one of the most respected academic journals are right, planet Earth could be on course for global warming of more than 7 degrees Celsius within a lifetime. And that, according to one of the world's most renowned climatologists, could be game over, particularly given the imminent presence of climate change denier Donald Trump in the White House. This has obviously been a big concern here at the COP, something we will just have to deal with. So, the question, again, is it game over for the climate? Now, I want to introduce you to a concept which Dr. Wadhams will be using when he discusses a couple of graphs we have down the road. The concept is called representative concentration pathways. It's UN speak for how things might go if we respond in one way or another. So let's gather those initials together. That acronym is RCP. And the RCPs represent possible trajectories for the future climate, the temperature of Earth, the rapidity of sea level rise, all the consequences that we're so familiar with. And those RCPs spell the difference between climate disruption and climate chaos, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I've got a brief video that I'd like to show you.
It's worth going through this a little bit. Jim Hayward made a point at a meeting recently that actually we should always start with this slide because there's a question of why are we doing this? Why are we doing this research? This is why. This is the latest projections from the International Panel of Climate Change. And the alarming thing, which again Sir Brian highlighted, is that these two scenarios actually explicitly include negative emissions technologies. So there is geoengineering of the flavour of carbon dioxide removal in the best case scenarios. The very, very alarming thing for us is that we are on this path here. That's AR 8.5. We are slap bang on this trajectory, and that puts us in a very, very different place in our children's or our grandchildren's lifetimes.
Now, that trajectory is commonly known as business as usual, the acronym BAU, if you see that anywhere. Business as usual, a very unpleasant future, to say the least. Now, I'd like to turn this over now to Dr. Wadhams and his wife to discuss these RCPs. Technically, what do you see?
Thank you. Well, the RCPs are a very complicated, I think unnecessarily complicated way of looking at how, at projecting how much climate change will happen in the future. And what they assume is that the number on the right-hand side after the RCP is the total radiative forcing the world will have suffered since the beginning of industry in the middle 19th century in watts per square metre. And the assumption is that the world keeps on emitting carbon dioxide, increasing the amount of climate forcing that it's experiencing, and then it reaches a peak and starts to diminish. So if it's a big number, it means that we keep increasing our carbon output rapidly for a long period, and if it's a small number, it means we start cutting back quickly. So it's a sort of code for representing different guesses, that is, models of how climatic change will work out. So the ones that they commonly quote are 2.6, which is the one where the radiative forcing goes down quite quickly. 2000 is the beginning there. And 4.5 and 6, which are 6 is more or less business as usual at present. 8.5 is the one which is quoted as the highest figure that they use in climate models. But in fact, 8.5 is the one that we're on. We're right on the 8.5 level at the moment. So we're heading up in our carbon emissions to the highest of the values that are used in modelling. If we move on to what that means for temperature, this bottom graph here shows what the sets of computer models used by IPCC, not necessarily correct, but that's what the models do.
And we discussed the models earlier today in one of our shows.
Yes, I mean, we know that the models are not good in many ways. For instance, they don't predict the loss of ice very well. But if we assume that they're predicting temperature reasonably accurately, then that's a very, very nasty picture we see at the bottom there, because the blue, which is the reassuring figure, which I think they put in because it is reassuring, shows that we warm a little bit more, and then we have a final temperature in a couple of hundred years' time that's less than 1 degree warmer than now.
Dr. Watson earlier said that requires huge amounts of carbon drawdown, carbon withdrawal from the atmosphere.
Yes, I mean, that basically the blue is impossible to attain, because the blue says that we never go above 411 parts per million carbon dioxide content, and we're already at that value, and we're bound to overshoot it by a huge amount. So the 2.6 is a completely unrealistic figure for how the world is going to go, unless we very quickly come up with some very effective means of taking a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which is not going to be an easy thing to do. So sadly, the one that's probably most likely to represent what happens to the planet is the 8.5, which is the red line, and that's giving us a global temperature rise of up to 8 degrees by 2300 in that map, and 4 degrees by 2100. So we're not really going to escape a warming of less than 4 degrees by the end of this century unless we take some very radical measures to cut down on the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere. And as this shows, it doesn't just stop at 4 degrees. The world doesn't end at 2100. It will keep on increasing in the end up to 8 degrees, which will be completely catastrophic. So we're on course for really serious climate effects this century, catastrophic effects further along the line.
Like what? Spell it out for us. And these catastrophic effects.
Well, there's a whole range of effects on top of the warming itself. The warming, a 4-degree warming globally doesn't sound like a lot, because in a country like England, we wouldn't mind 4 degrees of warming. But in the world as a whole, it will be radically reducing crop yields, because most of the present crops that are domesticated by man show a big decrease in yield if the temperature rises more than 1 or 2 degrees above present level. So at 4 degrees, there'll be huge losses of crops, and somehow you'd have to design some new crops. There'd also be, with that temperature rise, because of melt of the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet, there will probably be quite a lot more than a metre of global sea level rise, very much more frequent flooding of poor low-lying areas like Bangladesh.
Including shipping ports all over the world.
Yes, and the loss of western cities that happen to be built on the sea with low-lying land like Miami, and a lot of ports, New York, and cities, coastal cities like Shanghai will be severely affected.
You name it. Now, if I can interrupt you for a moment, I'm not specifically out to create an air of doom and gloom. My mission in life is to wake people up, because apparently, at least in my country, the United States, there are still a whole lot of people who need waking up. These are real consequences. We really face them. I would say the probability is very high that we really face these consequences. Starvation around the world, warfare over dwindling food resources. These are real things. The question is, how do we avoid them? And we'll get to that in a few moments. But again, did you have any more to add?
Well, to doom and gloom, well, there's many other things. You start to kick in with new effects when you warm up beyond a certain level, some of which are unpredictable, and some of which can be predicted. I mean, one of them is potentially a huge output of methane from shallow waters in the Arctic, produced by the fact that the ice has disappeared and the water is warming up and the protective layer of permafrost is melting. So that could give us 0.6 of a degree of warming within 2 or 3 years if it happened, if we had a pulse of methane of a magnitude that's been predicted. So that's a sort of joker in the pack. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, we get a big pulse of warming that's greater and more rapid than anything that we're thinking that we're going to get. And then that just adds itself to the rest of the warming that proceeds after that. So it's a 0.6 of a degree pulse, then the rest of what we're doing adds to that more slowly.
Now that's a 0.6 centigrade degree, so it's, again, a relative warming of about another degree Fahrenheit, the average global temperature, averaged over the entire globe. Now, again, I'd love to get input from your wife on what she sees in the future for us.
Well, basically, what I'm concerned about, given the line of work that I do, is what's going to happen to the Arctic people who live there, because we hear about the problem of climate warming from Africa, huge immigration towards the more temperate climates, etc. But we are talking about people who have been always living in a place which had ice and adapting to this kind of environment. And with these frightening effects of climate warming, the change is not like from a nomadic life to a sedentary life, which most Inuit populations have actually experienced almost in their lifetime in the last 50 or 60 years. But it's a complete revolution about life there. Now, whether in fact the Arctic could become a nicer place to live, I mean, that's a sort of question, isn't it? But certainly the effect, and that's what in fact is being shown with the Arctic Council, and so many southern countries who want to belong and be accepted as observers by the Arctic Council is showing that the Arctic is now very much a mainstream area of the world. It's not just hidden up there doing its own thing. And the effects, as we are hearing, are kind of frightening, and the only vague hope, if I don't want to subscribe to the total gloom and doom, would be that in this COP22, I've been going around, and there is a huge amount of goodwill, but whether the science and the technology actually exists or can be developed fast enough, That's very much a question.
Now, if we can shift a little bit to the hope side, I'd like to raise the question, what actually might give our children a future back? One of the hopeful things that I see, perhaps one of the most hopeful things on the horizon, is an effort in the United States called Our Children's Trust, which is an attempt to make the atmosphere of Earth a trust of future generations and give the responsibility to nations to take care of that trust for their future generations. And this is a body of law that's been tested in other terms, and it's now being tested, can the atmosphere be made a trust for future generations? And I'm very happy to announce that just a few days ago, a U.S. District Court in a constitutional climate case brought by 21 youths in Oregon, the judge said you can go to trial. Now, it's very interesting. There was a fight that the current administration, the Obama administration, put up against allowing these children to go to court. It was the Obama administration and ExxonMobil, strange bedfellows, who the children wanted to sue. And that was challenged, but the judge said that, yes, these children had an absolute right, very strong judgment she made, to take this to court. They had a right to sue for their future trust in the climate, essentially, in the atmosphere. This is the jubilation, the group photo after the judgment was given, and there's Dr. Hansen in the back. He's their science advisor. He's one of my mentors. And yes, there is no planet B. The current generation is stealing the planet from future generations. Now, one of the actions, people in the audience, people looking on the webcast, go to their website, which is ourchildrenstrust.org, and please consider making a donation. They are not asking me to pitch for them, but giving money to this effort is giving money to one of our best hopes for crossing swords with the incoming administration. Let it go through the courts. Let it go to the Supreme Court. Let's see what we can do. Let's see if other nations can emulate. And I'm told there are other nations where children are doing similar things. Now, the other action that I'd like to pitch to you, that I'd like to ask you to consider pursuing, is a strategic one that I came up with, a Nobel Peace Prize that was constructed in a manner that if it was awarded to the 3 candidates for this shared Peace Prize proposal, then it would shift the global economic paradigm. And make no mistake about it, the problem we have, its root cause, is an economic one. Carbon dioxide is doing the damage, but something else is generating the carbon dioxide, and that's an economic system which insists upon growth, which insists upon burning all the fossil fuels it can so that wealthy corporations and individuals can profit. Now, I'll give a very brief rundown of the proposal for you. That's the famous Nobel gold medal that's awarded. And there are 3 candidates. First is the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome is nominated because in 1972 they came out with a report called The Limits to Growth. It was ridiculed by the mainstream growth economists, of course, because it challenged their assumptions that there were no limits to the planet. It's been updated at least twice, and our path was still tracking their predictions in the report. The second nominee, Dr. Herman Daly, he was a World Bank senior economist for 6 years, and he's known as the father of ecological economics. Now, very few in the audience have heard of ecological economics, I feel it's safe to say, but it's very well worth your studying it because it's another concept which we might survive with if we were able to shift gears. And this Nobel Prize would help us shift gears. And the third candidate needs no introduction, Pope Francis, who issued the papal encyclical Laudato Si last year, which reads as a manifesto of ecological economics. And I'm trying to bring International Society for Ecological Economics together with the Vatican. That's one of my missions, one of my efforts. Here's a beautiful picture of Pope Francis in green robes, the green Pope. So I encourage you to go to the website, very easy to remember, NP4SD, Nobel Prize for Sustainable Development.org. And again, it's meant to shift the global economic paradigm. If awarded this way, I have to believe that university presidents all over the world would wake up to the announcement and say, do we teach that here? Most would get a no answer. Now, I only have a minute or so left to offer you any final remarks.
I believe that given the trends that are going on, what we need to do is to make a massive effort to develop techniques for taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, air capture, plus various methods of geoengineering. Whatever, in the end, we have to take carbon out of the atmosphere. So we better set about doing it quickly, get down to it now, because it will take many years to get a system that will work, and we need to put that in place before the temperature rise is too great for life to be possible, for civilized life to be possible for the planet.
Now, this is commonly known as geoengineering, and there's a huge pushback from the environmental community on that term. And I would just like to assert that the environmentalist community needs to take a second look, because don't throw the baby out with the bathwater is the saying. The geoengineering proposals need to be vetted, they need to be tested. The ones that are found to be benign need to be brought to scale. You're welcome to send me your criticisms, your questions, and you're welcome to check out the other shows on the Climate Matters TV website. So thank you very much for joining us. Again, there's my email address if you'd like to get in touch, and I can relay questions that you might have to our guests. Thank you for coming.